People ask all the time what it really takes to create change that lasts. Not temporary change, not emotional highs that fade in a week, not the kind of progress you talk about but never live into. Real change. Change that rewires who you are, how you think, how you feel, and how you act when no one is watching. And my answer is almost never what they expect. Because everybody says they want change. Everybody says they want a better body, more confidence, deeper relationships, financial freedom, inner peace. Everybody wants the outcome. But very few people want the process that creates the outcome. Everybody wants strength, but nobody wants to train. Everybody wants freedom, but nobody wants discipline. Everybody wants mastery, but almost no one wants repetition. That's the disconnect. You see it everywhere. People say, I want to lose weight, but what they really mean is, I want the discomfort to go away. They say, I want a great relationship. But what they really mean is, I want it without learning how to communicate differently. They say, I want confidence, but they're unwilling to practice courage when it feels awkward or scary, and then people wonder why nothing sticks. If you want to improve anything, you must measure it. People avoid measurement because measurement tells the truth. If you never step on a scale, weight doesn't feel real until it suddenly is. If you never look at your finances, debt doesn't feel urgent until it becomes overwhelming. If you never assess your relationships, disconnection sneaks in quietly. Measurement brings awareness. Awareness brings choice. Choice brings power. That's why businesses don't collapse overnight. They drift. That's why relationships don't die suddenly. They erode. That's why health doesn't vanish instantly. It degrades. All progress and all destruction is the result of tiny decisions compounded over time. So if you want lasting change, there are two non-negotiables. First, commit to mastery. Second, immerse yourself in an environment that reinforces that mastery. Mastery means you stop trying and start deciding. Trying is a loophole. Trying gives you an escape route. Trying allows you to quit without confronting your identity. Deciding shuts the door. When you decide, your standards change. When your standards change, your behaviors follow. When your behaviors follow, your results become inevitable. But here's where people get stuck. Even when they decide, they don't create the structure to sustain that decision. And that's where immersion and coaching come in. One of the greatest lies people tell themselves is that they should already know how to change. That if they were smarter, stronger, more disciplined, or more motivated, they would have figured it out by now. That belief alone keeps millions of people trapped because mastery has never been passed down through isolation. Think about how human beings have learned anything of value throughout history: skills, crafts, leadership, warfare, medicine, art, business, strategy, survival. Mastery was never learned from motivation alone. It was learned through immersion. You didn't read a book and suddenly become a blacksmith. You didn't watch a video and suddenly become a warrior. You didn't think positively and suddenly become a master strategist. You lived around someone who already knew. You watched how they moved. You absorbed how they thought. You felt the emotional patterns behind their decisions. You picked up the tiny distinctions no book could ever teach. That's apprenticeship. That's immersion. That's how mastery is transferred. And yet today, people expect transformation without proximity. They want life change without environment change. They want discipline without structure. They want confidence without conditioning. They want results without immersion. Most people never even find a real mentor. They say they want one, but what they really want is reassurance, not challenge. They want comfort, not correction. They want encouragement, not accountability. A real coach doesn't just make you feel good. A real coach makes you better, and sometimes that means discomfort. The reason coaching works, whether in sports, business, relationships, or personal growth, is simple. You cannot see what you cannot see. When you're inside your own head, you normalize patterns that are destroying you. You justify habits that are limiting you. You rationalize behaviors that are holding you back. A coach stands outside the forest while you're lost in the trees. That doesn't mean the coach is better than you. In fact, many of the greatest athletes in the world were more talented than their coaches. But talent without perspective plateaus. Even legends had coaches. The best performers in history didn't rely on self-awareness alone. They relied on feedback, structure, measurement, and someone who would tell them the truth before life did. And here's what most people don't understand. Coaching is not therapy. Therapy often looks backward. Coaching is relentlessly forward-focused. Coaching is about strategy, COA. Coaching is about leverage. Coaching is about accelerating results. You don't pay a coach for sympathy. You pay a coach for outcomes. When I first started, there was no coaching industry. That term didn't exist the way it does now. People didn't talk about life coaches, performance coaches, executive coaches. That language hadn't entered the culture yet. I didn't start with a label. I started with a problem. People were stuck and traditional approaches were too slow. So I became obsessed with one question: what actually works? Not theory, not opinion, not credentials, results. I studied anyone who produced extraordinary outcomes. Psychologists, athletes, business leaders, strategists, peak performers, anyone who could consistently help people break through limitations. I didn't invent most of the tools I use, I modeled them. I studied what worked across cultures, across backgrounds, across belief systems. I synthesized patterns. I eliminated what didn't produce measurable change, and then I tested everything in the real world. Early on, I put my reputation on the line constantly. I'd say, give me your worst case. The phobia that's lasted decades, the habit that's destroyed relationships, the fear no one else could touch, give me an hour. And when it worked, not sometimes, but consistently, people paid attention. That's the difference between information and transformation. Information doesn't change lives. Application does, and application requires structure. Most people try to change their lives the same way they try to change their mood. Randomly, emotionally, and consistently. They binge motivation, then crash. They attend an event, then return to the same environment. They read a book, then go back to old habits, and then they say, it didn't work. No, you didn't work. The system immersion coaching solves that problem. Immersion means you don't rely on willpower. You rely on design. Your environment reinforces your identity. Your measurements reinforce your focus. Your coach reinforces your standards. That's why immersion accelerates change at a level motivation never can. Research backs this up. Training alone improves performance, but modestly, training combined with coaching nearly quadruples results. Why? Because coaching creates feedback loops. It creates accountability. It creates emotional leverage. It creates course correction before failure. Compounds. And here's something people don't talk about enough. Coaching saves time. People waste years making avoidable mistakes. They pay tuition to failure they didn't need to attend. They repeat cycles someone else already solved. A coach compresses time. A slight correction today becomes a radically different destination a year from now. Think about navigation. If you're off by just a few degrees, it doesn't seem like much at first. But over distance, that tiny deviation leads you somewhere completely different. That's life. Coaches help you make those small adjustments early, before pain becomes your teacher, and pain is a very expensive instructor. That's why immersion works best when it combines multiple layers. Personal coaching, group energy, structured events, daily reinforcement, measurable progress. One without the others is helpful. Altogether, transformational. When people experience deep immersion, whether at an event, in a coaching container, or within a high-performance environment, they don't just learn differently, they become different. Because identity shifts faster in groups. Beliefs rewire faster in motion. Momentum multiplies when energy is shared. That's why one weekend of total immersion can sometimes create more change than years of isolated effort. But here's the key. Immersion alone isn't enough if it isn't sustained. That's why ongoing coaching matters. Events create breakthroughs. Coaching turns breakthroughs into standards. SDA. Standards are what determine your future, and once standards change, behavior follows automatically. One of the biggest myths about success is that it's something you either have or you don't. That some people are born confident, decisive, disciplined, and resilient, and others just aren't. That belief destroys potential, because success is not a personality trait. Success is a pattern, and patterns can be learned, installed, and reinforced if you know what to look for. Early in my career, I realized something that changed everything. The fastest way to help someone succeed was not to fix what was broken, but to model what already worked. Instead of asking, why does this person fail? I started asking, what exactly does this person do when they succeed? Mentally, emotionally, physically? Not what they say they do, not what they believe they do, what they actually do, because peak performers have strategies, even if they can't explain them. They breathe differently. They focus differently. They interpret stress differently. They talk to themselves differently. They create certainty before results show up. Those patterns are not genetic. They are learned. Once you identify them, you can transfer them. That's why I never focused on theory. I focused on replication. If something worked once, that was interesting. If it worked consistently, that was valuable. If it worked across people, cultures, and circumstances, that was gold. That approach took me into environments most people never see. One of those was the United States Army. I went to a general and told him something that sounded outrageous, that I could take any training program in the entire Army, cut the training time in half, and increase competency. He thought I was crazy. And honestly, he had every reason. I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't a weapons expert. I had never even fired a gun. But I understood human performance. So we made a deal. I would get paid nothing unless I delivered results. They gave me one of the most difficult training programs to optimize .45 caliber pistol training. They introduced me to the best shooters in the armed forces, elite performers whose accuracy was off the charts. Then they had me try. I was terrible. The gun kicked. My shots were off. My confidence dropped instantly, and that moment taught me everything I needed to know, because mechanically the gun wasn't the problem. The problem was conditioning. I noticed something fascinating about the best shooters. They weren't focused on the distance to the target. They mentally brought the target closer. Their nervous systems were calm, their expectations were certain, their bodies knew success before it happened. So I redesigned the training. New recruits didn't start by firing at a distant target. They started 5 feet away. They followed the exact same mechanics, breathing, stance, and focus. But at a distance where success was inevitable. Boom. Bullseye. Confidence surged. Then we moved the target slightly farther. Boom. Bullseye again. Success stacked on success. Instead of training failure and hoping for confidence later, we trained certainty first and expanded it. The results were dramatic. Training time was cut in half. Accuracy increased. Confidence skyrocketed. Why? Because success must be conditioned, not demanded. Most people do the opposite in life. They set impossible standards, fail repeatedly, and then wonder why their confidence collapses. Confidence isn't built by hoping. It's built by winning in sequence. That lesson applies everywhere. If you want to change your body, you don't start by destroying yourself in the gym. You start by building momentum. If you want to change your finances, you don't start by trying to master everything. You start by creating small, repeatable wins. If you want to change your emotions, you don't wait until life is perfect. You condition yourself to respond differently in imperfect moments. That's how identity changes, this approach. It took me from working with everyday people to working with world-class performers, athletes, CEOs, political leaders, financial traders, royal families, not because I was better than them, but because I could see patterns they were too close to notice. One of my long-term clients is one of the most successful financial traders in the world. He has generated massive returns even when markets collapsed, including periods where trillions of dollars were lost globally. People assume someone like that doesn't need coaching. That's laughable. He understands something most people don't. The higher the stakes, the smaller the margin for error. When decisions affect millions or billions of dollars, tiny emotional leaks become catastrophic. So we work not on intelligence, but on state control, decision-making clarity, and risk discipline. Year after year, the results justified the investment, not because of motivation, because off structure. And that's the point most people miss. Extraordinary results don't come from extraordinary effort. They come from extraordinary systems. People think success is about pushing harder. It's not. It's about aligning psychology, environment, and behavior. So success becomes the path of least resistance. That's what real coaching does. It doesn't give you hype. It gives you leverage. And leverage is what allows ordinary people to produce extraordinary outcomes.